Man working late suddenly made a terrifying discovery. The female boss was shot dead by the most handsome man in the company. He hid in fear at the corner, afraid that the handsome guy would see him, but luckily the killer didn't notice anything strange, and went to deal with the boss. Only then did Jeff let out a sigh of relief. If he was spotted he would surely die. He quickly went to the restroom to hide, but didn't expect to bump into the company guard when he opened the door. Seeing the guard lying motionless, he immediately checked his injuries, but accidentally touched the toilet flush switch. Such a loud sound would definitely be heard by the killer. Jeff carefully closed the door first, but in such a small space where could he hide? In order not to be found, he had to stand on top of the guard. Jeff was trembling with fear the whole time, afraid he might be discovered, but surprisingly the killer didn't see him at all. He just came in to wash his clothes. Only then did Jeff finally relax, but when he thought he was safe, he suddenly heard inside.
How you doing in there, Barney? You wanna toss me the keys?
He noticed the keys on the guard, and instantly knew what the killer wanted. He quietly jumped down, then used his small build to his advantage. The moment the man pushed the door open, Jeff had already switched positions successfully, but just as the killer was about to grab the keys, the flush behind Jeff made a sound. Luckily the killer also triggered the flush. Jeff barely escaped disaster. When the killer left the restroom, Jeff quickly followed the passage back. When he reached a room, he was about to call the police, but suddenly ran into a colleague working late. Jeff told him something terrible had happened in the company. Meanwhile the killer had destroyed the fire valve, then went straight to the archive room with company secrets, opened the alcohol in his suitcase, planning to burn all the company files. On the other side Jeff took his colleague to escape, but when they entered the elevator they found it was broken, so they switched to the emergency exit. But the door was somehow locked tight. Luckily the killer still didn't know they were there. After discussion they decided to split up, and use electronic devices to call for help. Jeff went out to find a phone, but when he turned the corner, he saw a shadow through the glass. Jeff had to go back the way he came. He rushed back and told his colleague to stay quiet. At the same time the killer pushed the door open. He immediately noticed the computer still running. Jeff peeked out from under the desk, and suddenly saw two shoes approaching. He and his colleague broke into cold sweat in fear, but the killer just unplugged the power and walked out. After confirming the killer was gone, they decided to take a longer path to the other side of the company. Jeff learned from his colleague that the boss was also inside the building, so he left the task of calling for help to him, while he went back to rescue the boss. But as soon as the colleague dialed for help, a sense of doom came over him. He turned around. The man was standing silently behind him. Meanwhile Jeff, through the window, saw that his colleague had already been spotted by the killer.
Anybody else working late tonight?
No, it's just me.
The colleague thought he had survived, but the killer strangled him with a rope. Later when Jeff carefully entered the office, he didn't see them inside, so he quickly grabbed the phone, but just as he tried to call the police, a low battery warning popped up. Helplessly, he shakily plugged in the charger, but when he looked up he found his colleague already lifeless. At that moment the killer came back into the office for some reason. Jeff hid behind the desk in terror. Then while the killer was moving the body, he quietly opened a small door and slipped inside. Suddenly the killer looked his way. It turned out this was the killer's base for covering up evidence. Hearing his footsteps coming closer, Jeff almost predicted his own end, but there was nowhere to hide. Just at this critical moment, a phone rang outside. Attracted by the ringtone the killer left. Jeff seized the chance to escape the terrible room, but the existence of the phone made the man suspicious. He held his gun and searched place by place. Jeff finally ran into a room facing the street. He used the burning curtain as a signal, hoping to get attention from the opposite building, and the man understood Jeff's situation. He immediately called the police, but this also made the killer suspicious. He followed the smell of burning straight over, and ran into Jeff coming out the door, but the killer's target wasn't him. Instead he rushed inside to put out the fire, then signaled to the opposite side that the danger was over. Meanwhile Jeff entered the surveillance room, first used his work badge to activate the access control, then wiped out other people's badges. Jeff destroyed the access system. This made it impossible for the killer to swipe in again, and since Jeff had the only valid badge, he no longer had to fear the killer. He rushed into the boss's office. The two inside hadn't figured out what was going on. When they heard the killer's voice outside, he shot open the lock, then stormed in, and killed the woman inside, then pointed the gun at the boss, forcing him to reveal the access system. But Jeff used this moment to escape the office. Strangely though, the killer didn't kill the boss. He just warned him not to leave, then went to search for Jeff. But unexpectedly, Jeff actually came back. Seeing the woman's body on the floor, they figured the killer's mission was to take her out. To avoid drawing attention, they both went to hide in the archive room. The door there was heavily reinforced, and the walls were unbreakable, but just as they were on the way,
What is he doing? Was he one in the fire room?
It seemed there was something in the archive the killer wanted. To avoid being exposed, they hurried back to the office, but then they heard the killer opening the door behind them. They quickly hid under the desk. To avoid being exposed, they hurried back to the office, but then they heard the killer opening the door behind them. They quickly hid under the desk. Through the glass they saw the killer dragging the colleague in, to force them to surrender. The killer said he only wanted the badge, not their lives, but Jeff had clearly seen the colleague killed, so he didn't believe a word. The killer then opened fire. During the escape the boss was shot and injured, but to survive, they didn't dare stop for a second. Finally they escaped back to the archive before being caught, but the killer wasn't angry at failing. Instead he held up Jeff's phone to show him. On the screen was his SOS message to his girlfriend. Jeff could only hope she hadn't checked her phone, but she replied saying she would be there in 10 minutes. Jeff completely lost his composure. Even when the man left with a smile, he kept pounding the door begging him. The boss warned Jeff going out was certain death, but his girlfriend was about to arrive. Jeff took both his and his colleagues' badges, and suddenly had an idea. He walked toward the printer. Meanwhile the killer met Jeff's girlfriend. Being cautious he shut down the elevator, then pointed his weapon at her. Because of the gun, the woman had to hand over her phone. But just then Jeff revealed himself. He tried to use the badges as leverage, telling the killer to release his girlfriend, or he would cut the badges in half. Jeff thought the killer would hesitate, but he didn't care at all. Then the boss also came out of the room, heroically offering himself as hostage, to let the woman go. Strangely, the killer agreed and put down his gun, then pushed the boss into the archive room.
You shot me!
You might just live. You're supposed to be the boss. How hard is it to clear out your own office?
No one expected they were actually in it together. It turned out the killer was hired by the boss to burn the illegal files, but when the killer activated the bomb, the boss betrayed him and ran away first. The killer quickly swiped his badge on the sensor, but the door didn't open at all. That was when Jeff pulled out the real badge. The killer finally realized he had been tricked. He tore off the copied paper on top, revealing the colleague's badge underneath. His eyes widened in shock, and he rushed toward the bomb, but it was already too late. The explosion engulfed the room in flames. The killer fainted in the fire. Seeing this, Jeff decided to open the door, because he couldn't let the files be destroyed. Even though Jeff managed to contain the fire, the revived killer attacked him. Jeff as an ordinary man was no match. Luckily his girlfriend knocked him out with a tool. Then came the sound of a gunshot. It was the boss who dealt the killer a fatal blow. Then Jeff checked the burned documents on the table, and was shocked to find records of the company's illegal dealings. Jeff deduced that the killer came for this file. He explained his thoughts to the boss, but just as he tried to use the killer's phone to call the police, he saw a familiar number on the first line. Not sure he pressed call, and to his shock the phone inside the boss's jacket started ringing. At that moment he realized the truth. The boss was the real mastermind. He had illegal deals with the drug company, and lied to the judge in court. The evidence to overturn it all was now stored in the archive. The boss begged Jeff to keep it secret, and offered him tempting conditions, but Jeff with a strong sense of justice refused. For himself, and for justice, his decision was to take the evidence, and expose the boss's ugly deeds to everyone. The boss knew his end was near, so he ended his own life. Movie original scene.